we go after we clearly define what our desired outcomes are. We want to very much understand who our own brand is, what we call the brand voice, the brand personality. Now, the idea of a brand having a personality emerged also in the 60s during that wonderful Mad Men era. And they actually did some studies, and we replicated those studies, and we found that it was true. We took some photographs, and we put them on a board, various types. We had like a soccer mom, we had a hip young Asian guy, we had people from all sorts of demographics. And we went out into the street, and we asked people if a certain brand came to life tomorrow morning, knocked on your door, and you opened the door, who would it be? Who would Starbucks be if they knocked on your door? And the interesting thing was that the preponderance of people pointed to a certain photograph and said, that's Starbucks, or that's Google. And the interesting thing was that there was consensus around that, which helps prove a point that people do project persona onto brands. Now, if you understand that, and you go, well, okay, people project personas onto brands, what does that mean for our brand? Who do we want to be? And then if we identify who we want to be, how are we going to shape how we talk? Now, this is more critical in 2012 than it ever was in 1962 or 1972. At that point, brands were broadcasting to their customers. Today, we're having one-on-one conversations, so it's even more critical than ever to have a clearly defined brand voice. Now, what I've got up on the screen here right now is Professor Jennifer Acker's 5 brand personality traits. And she talks about the major 5. Now, these came from psychology, where they say that people, individuals, have 5 major brand personality traits. And we can sort of work through these to try to understand how our own brand has a voice, what we want it to be, and choose 2 or 3 of these for our own brand. Here's the second screen showing on down, where we get into. So we go from sincerity, excitement, confidence, sophistication, and ruggedness. Then each one of these main personality traits also has more particular sub-items underneath it, facets, and then attributes. Another way of looking at brand voice is in a more, 30,000 feet up. When I look at how I'm speaking in social, there's the maven, there's the person who knows a lot about stuff and is being helpful with other people. There's the voice that is the voice of passion. They're very excited about something. They're sharing it with the world. There's community, whether it's actually a geographically specific community or a broader sort of community based around affinities. My least favorite is the promotional voice. And, of course, there's others. This isn't a limit. And what I would recommend you do is go and look at your own social media voice and pull it up and make screenshots of a lot of instances and try to determine what kind of voice do we have and what kind of voice do we want to have and how can we change that. Stop and look at what some of the major brands, let's say like Nike, is a perfect proponent of the passion voice. They're always talking about people overcoming their physical limits to do wonderful, great things. And gee, Coach Smith, that yellow jersey looks great on you. Congratulations on your 500th win. That's a passion voice. They're not talking about how you should go and buy their shoes. So the next thing we go into after we've identified our desirable outcomes, we've identified our own brand personality, then we get into what we call micro-segmentation. Now, segmentation is looking at audiences from various viewpoints. The idea of demographic segmentation is, well, I'm looking at people in certain age groups, or are they married or not, what religions they belong to. We get into other types of segmentation, like psychographic segmentation. But in micro-segmentation, our objective is to find the smallest possible groups relating or who might be related to what we're going to go out there and be social about. And when we're able to identify those micro groups, we're able to find where they are in social and have one-on-one conversations. Now, the example that I start off with here is, a hypothetical manufacturer of animal figurines. And say we're doing social media for this manufacturer. And we start off with, well, everybody loves animals. And you can see right there what your challenge is as a marketer. How do I go out and market to everybody who's an animal lover? It's just too much, and it's just not the way that social works well. So let's start thinking, How we can break that off? Well, there's people who love farm animals, there's people who love African wildlife, and then there's people who love domestic animals. Now, in our team situation, we'll do a whiteboard brainstorming where we're breaking this out into all sorts of smaller segments. We would break off farm animals and the African wildlife. And in this case, I'm going to break off domestic animals. People love fish and birds and cats and ferrets and dogs. And people who love dogs, well, then there's obedience, there's rescue dogs, there's working dogs, there's all the different breeds. And the different breeds, there's hounds, there's toy, there's terriers, and this goes on and on. And terriers, there's Airedales, there's Scottish Terriers, Wire Fox Terriers, and then Airedales. There also happens to be a group in Illinois, the Airedale Terrier Club of Illinois. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep breaking off all of these little groups and create a Word document that's indented showing all of these micro groups. Once we've brainstormed all the possible micro groups that we possibly can, this is a living document. We're going to use it throughout our social media marketing activities. But with each one of these, I can then do online research to find out where the communities are around these small groups. Sometimes we even dig in even further. We were doing a project for an organization that helped musicians in need, and we were going through all the various iterations of who should care about musicians. And one of the things we did was we started looking at universities. And then when we dove into, let's say, Berkeley, we found that there was a group of people who liked world music at Berkeley. And by the way, there was a micro community of people who liked Zydeco dancing every Thursday night in that group. We were able to target that group and reach out to them in social media and start having conversation, real engagement with that group. So after we've done our micro segmentation, then we go into communities. We use keyword research around those micro segments that we found that's going to suggest a lot of words. We're going to use this very similar keyword research that we use in search engine optimization or pay-per-click marketing. We're going to look to see if there's existing communities in place, or in very rare instances, we might even identify opportunities to create our own communities. And then once we've identified those communities, we're going to ask ourselves, well, how can we participate? Do we jump in and become a voice in that community, or do we very quietly sit in the background for now and wait it out? So then there's also the entire role of community management, which of course is probably everybody in this call knows is one of the hottest job descriptions of the year. There's new organizations popping up around community management. Now, community management is a whole topic in and of itself. There's internal community management. They're the people who manage the community inside the company and try to encourage the company to become a stronger participant. And then there's the community manager that helps to motivate outside communities to have conversations. Not necessarily control the community, but really enable that community to have a more vibrant living discussion that we can participate in. One of the things I bring up here is something called the WISPY community. WISPY communities were proposed by psychologist Gary Fine and Lisa Jo Vanden Scott. There was a paper that came out this year. The idea of a WISPY community is it's a community that's very short-lived. So if you go to a conference next week and you meet some people and you get involved with the conference and you get some nice photographs, you come back home, but then you're sort of back in your job. But that very short-lived community was what's called a WISPY community, and people have very, very strong emotional ties to these WISPY communities. The photograph that I use here is Burning Man, the people who go out to the middle of the Nebraska desert every year and have these huge festivals, and when the people come back to their jobs as CPAs or accountants or hairdressers, whatever they do in life, they remember so fondly those 2 weeks out in the desert. They absolutely love it. So the question is for us as marketers, how can we use the types of very strong emotional ties that people get with these WISPY communities to our benefit? One of the things I see is when we do events and we do social media around events, we should do more activities that actually help encourage sort of a connection afterwards. So if you're choosing your swag, you don't want to just choose a pin with your logo on it. That's really not going to encourage a co-memory of the event. Whereas those vendors that have photograph booths set up with their logo in the background, they're creating a sort of a joint effort, if you will, that can increase that feeling of WISPY community. So I spoke earlier about the notion that there's different types of social media projects, and I just want to briefly go over those. There's the type of social media project, and the most common is simply brand maintenance. You're taking care of your brand. You're making sure that you're listening to what people might be saying about you, your brand, your competitors. You're answering, maybe doing a little customer service. You're not really necessarily involved deeply in community. That's brand maintenance. Then, of course, there's reputation and crisis. We saw that, let's say, with British Petroleum when they had their crisis, their oil spill, and they really had to jump into social and be involved with it from a point of reputation and crisis. There's a social media project that is built around community building, community management. How can we become a more strong influence within a community and help create more participation? There's a type of social media project, we call it influencer outreach. It's where we very specifically target a portfolio of influencers, and we have a concerted effort to reach out, connect with those people wherever we can in a very nice, non-stalkerish sort of way. And then how do we create relationships with those people? And that is a very common type of social media project, most oftenly done with B2B projects right now.